Present day. To stand in Valles Caldera in northwest New Mexico is to experience the history of the world. The immense age that presses up from beneath your feet here is like a magmatic intrusion, unbalancing you through sheer chronological pressure. The place you stand today is a fleeting expression, a flash in the incomprehensible vastness of history layered on this place. When rain falls in the dry valles, it echoes the lake that was recently here, itself an echo of a broad interior seaway dividing the continent from the Gulf to the Arctic Circle. When a fumarole emits a hiss of hot steam, it is a reverberation of volcanism that buried the region under millions of tons of ash and lava, extinguished life in a radius of hundreds of miles, raised the Colorado Plateau, and then shattered it. Most of these monumental events do not persist in human memory, but they are preserved in the memory of the landscape. Strata. Strata reflects time. Time reflects strata. Billions of years suspended in billions of tons of rock. They are one and the same to the earth, and to see the stone of times long past is to see the disassembled worlds beneath our own, and to accept that our world will someday be the disassembled world beneath another. 1,000 years ago. Geologically, the Earth has barely blinked between this point and the present. The domes of the caldera are slightly higher, and a few more streams flow off their shoulders. A shallow, bitter lake, deeply sedimented, lies in Valle Grande, depositing itself to death. Along its shore, ancestral Puebloans walk, hunting the plentiful elk, gathering useful plant life, and looking for obsidian. This black glass, sharper than any razor, reflects the violence that has been and will be visited on this region, by the volcanism that created it, the spear tips that were shaped from it, and the colonists that will one day idly search for arrowheads. Near the caldera, the ancestral Puebloans have begun to take a direct, active role in geology. The people of this region know they came from the earth, their heritage in layers beneath, and they rekindle this connection through digging kivas into the sediment, where they commune with their ancestry. They also have learned the value of water reclamation in this drying land. Earthen dams, dikes, and reservoirs alter erosion patterns as they bring life to the people and their crops. While they understand this place, and can reliably predict its cycles and changes, tectonic change will be visited upon them nonetheless. Their world will disassemble in disease and genocide, and while many of their descendants will survive to the present, the world they inhabit will be vastly different, even as the geology barely blinks. "10,000 years ago. The Valles Caldera's profile is still largely the same. The domes stand tall and rough, slightly less worn by wind and rain. The lakebed is dry and empty, full of grasses and braided with seasonal streams. To find the real change, the inhabitants must be examined. The people here are at a liminal point, an invisible line between two strata of human history, a cultural and environmental change happening too slowly for any one generation to notice. The Clovis culture is disappearing into the Folsom culture, eroded like flakes of stone napped off an obsidian projectile point, making it characteristically thinner and more fluted. It is the streamlined weapon of a culture that has streamlined their food gathering through the chipping away of their ecosystem. The Columbian mammoths, giant ground sloths, and many other megafauna are fast disappearing into the flake heap of history. The hunters are not the only cause of this decrease in biodiversity, however. The end of the glacial maxim and the long, slow thaw of the Ice Age has paradoxically brought about a rapid cooling event, the Younger Dryas. A few thousand miles to the north, weakening glacial dams unleash billions of gallons of fresh, frigid water into the Atlantic, wreaking havoc on the circulation of the ocean and the climate patterns it creates. Every year is slightly colder than the last and brings more erratic weather. The strata here are not eroded by frequent gentle rains, but by arid wind or violent deluges that alternately desiccate and drown the land. Not far in the future from this moment in time, the last giant ground sloth plods warily across the cold landscape, looking for an oasis ingrained deep in the memory of its species. It reaches the site and finds only a dry, sandy depression. It lays down in the hollow, exhausted, and is covered by a burial shroud of wind-blown sediment. The Valles caldera still looks largely the same. 100,000 years ago. This landscape begins to look less recognizable. The lake is absent, but the Valles is full of fluvial sediment and the roaring streams that deposit it. The volcanic birth of this place is more apparent in the rough domes that encircle the Valle, the more recent of which bear traces of ancient lava flows. However, the true violence of the caldera's origin is still buried beneath the silty channels of 1,000 streams and a dozen lakes that have filled and emptied from it since its inception. The ecosystem is far less recognizable than the landscape. Striding amongst familiar elk are giants that make the large deer look utterly diminutive. Ground sloths, tripod-like with their muscular tail, stand 12 feet tall to browse from the trees. Kin groups of female Columbian mammoths and their young are shadowed by colossal lone bulls, 13 feet at the shoulder. The ponderosa pines of today still hold the memories of these titanic foresters in their biology, their roots and trunks braced against attacks that no longer come. Humanity is still on the other side of the ocean, and it will be tens of thousands of years until glaciers pull back the shroud of the sea to reveal land bridges that will lead them to this place. This past world, like many, is the lull between two collapses. The collapse of the caldera, brought on by the slow twisting of the continent, and the collapse of the megafaunal ecosystem, caused by a changing climate and the arrival of a new apex predator. The latter will relegate this world to the sediments of the streams, but it is the former collapse that makes this place truly unrecognizable. 1 million years ago. The Valle is a steaming crater, as inhospitable as it is foreboding. A vast boiling moat surrounds a dome of volcanic rock standing stark in the center. The margins of this isle and the caldera rim are terraced with geothermal springs, gemstone greens, blues, and yellows, thanks to the dissolved minerals and extremophile microorganisms they support. These simple, hardy creatures are some of the only living things in the massive crater, and life has only recently begun to return in force to the devastated surrounding region. When the caldera was born, it was a cataclysm unlike any ever seen by humankind. A 14-mile-wide mountain fell thousands of feet, collapsing into the magma chamber beneath it, releasing hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated pressure in an instant. Lava flowed over 20 miles, only stopping when it reached the Rio Grande Rift, filling the canyon and boiling the river to steam. Clouds of dust and debris blotted out the sun 500 miles away, with southwesterly winds carrying the ash as far as Nebraska. Most life within 100 miles was likely wiped out, buried under a suffocating blanket of ash, or slowly starved in a sunless apocalypse. Aftershocks of this eruption have been rocking the area ever since, and they will continue to the present day. The dome at the center of the boiling lake is evidence of this. It is resurgent, slowly lifting from the lake as pressure and magma build again in chambers deep beneath. Someday it will be surrounded by the evidence of its origins. Smaller rhyolitic lava domes will emerge in a half ring around it, a comparatively gentle release of pressure that staves off another eruption. The boiling lake of the caldera will be replaced by cooler waters as sediment fills the crater, but it will never disappear, only go underground. Today, its only outlet to the surface is through the hot springs and fumaroles that dot the landscape of the caldera. This inhospitable world lives on in the rock deep beneath the Valles, returned to its original home. 10 million years ago. A broad valley, lush and riparian, hemmed in by steep walls. Shallow soil supports only small numbers of trees, but a diversity of grasses and shrubs crowd the valley floor. Ancestors of the Columbian mammoths, much smaller gomphotheres, trumpet near the river's edge. Also common in the valley are camels and rhinoceros, which along with these ancestral elephants, evolved on this continent and are refugees in their distant homes in the present. With the exception of the fauna, this river valley in many ways appears like one you might see in the region today, but its geological contours reveal an underlying wrongness. This valley was not carved by the river, but split open due to forces deep beneath it. The Colorado Plateau is still young, only recently blistered up as North America drifted over a plume of heat and liquid rock rising through the inner earth. As the plateau bulged with pressure, the crust twisted, buckled, and fractured along its edge, crustal blocks breaking loose to float on the mantle, like great stony ships jostling on an unseen ocean. Sedimentation, buried for tens of millions of years, the unseen floors of silent seas, were hoisted high into the air as basin and range subdivided themselves, separating sediment that was once consecutive into peaks and troughs, crackling waveforms across the landscape with thousands of feet of amplitude. The rifting of these valleys is only the edge of a system of fractures spiderwebbing from a great divide forming to the east, where the continent is tearing itself apart to accommodate a future river, the Rio Grande Rift. This wound where the plateau ends has been opening and sinking for millennia, and with every inch that the rift plunges into the plastic rock beneath, pressure builds under the highlands to the west, the future caldera. Magma has already begun to seep from deeper in the planet, forming a chamber that will one day wipe this landscape from the Earth and build a wholly new geology atop it. But that is the distant future of this world, and long before these rift valleys were a distant dream, this place was part of another sort of valley, far broader and stranger than this. 100 million years ago. A vast stretch of open water. The Colorado Plateau is unborn, gestating thousands of feet below the heightened sea levels of the Cretaceous. The limestone sediment that will one day form the tops of mesas accumulating on a sunless seafloor. The seas have lapped at the shores of this continent until they worked their way into its heart. As the oceanic plate beneath the Pacific spread wide, it smashed a conveyor belt of volcanic island chains into the west coast, uplifting the ancestors of the Sierras. The lowlands to the east sunk in response, were overtaken by the sea, and then further inundated with the nutrient-rich water of 1,000 rivers from the mountains. It now bears a diversity of marine life that is utterly alien. Fish larger than most sharks today are low on the food chain, which supports elasmosaurs with 23-foot necks, and sea turtles with shells longer than a man. The apex predator of this ecosystem is Tylosaurus, a voracious 46-foot-long mosasaur, twice the length of the largest killer whale. These massive reptiles, strange, streamlined, and viviparous, are no longer able to support their leviathan bodies on land, and so are bound to this shallow and mercurial sea that's shoreline can change by miles within their lifetimes. The sea will come and go from this place many more times before the present. The first uplifts that will someday be the Rocky Mountains will not pull this basin into the sky for at least another 20 million years. Until then, this vast stretch of open water is a world of its own. 1 billion years ago. A sea of stone. The basement is at the surface, though 3.5 billion years of subbasement are already submerged below. This is the foundation of the continent. At its margins, still foaming forth from volcanoes, not unlike the caldera that will someday form here. There is nothing but oxidizing rock as far as the eye can see, though even the most rudimentary of eyes will not open for another 480 million years. There is no plant life, no soil to obscure it. This is geology laid bare, strata in high relief. Time and space are fully abstract here. Less than a quarter of our planet's lifespan ago, there is no point of reference in this strange vista. No recognizable landmass, no plant or animal, and nothing to mark the daily passing of time except the rotations of the heavens, which are watched over by a dim sun, an unfamiliar moon, and alien arrangements of stars. Far away, at the shores of a primordial ocean, our ancestors float mindlessly in the waves, single-celled and simple, unaware of this place or of anything beyond their own metabolisms. This world is disassembling even now, as continents slowly crush against each other and algae poison themselves with oxygen. This world is lost, yet it is our own. We float in its shallows today, aware of very little beyond our own metabolisms. We are a brief nonconformity, and soon we will be relegated to strata of our own, our time captured like an insect in amber, a thin layer of sediment, deposited, and one day washed away.